The Biden administration's federal vaccine mandate has been neutered, at least for now, but versions of it are popping up in cities all over the country. Some companies are even choosing to require it themselves. So Heritage Foundation Senior Fellow of Domestic Policy Studies, Doug Badger, is joining me now to talk about what's going on and what role the Heritage Foundation is playing in all of this. Doug, thank you so much for being on Save the Nation.
Thanks for having me.
So, Doug, it appears that Biden's federal vaccine mandate has had its legs cut out from under it, at least for the time being. Do you think it's likely to return?
Well, these cases are still before the court, and we have a whole series of Biden administration mandates. But so far, the mandate on federal contractors, on hospitals and other medical institutions, and on companies with at least 100 employees, all of those have been temporarily stopped by the court. Now the administration is appealing those preliminary rulings, and so you never know what the courts are going to do. But fundamentally, the problem is that Congress has not given any federal agency the authority to require people to be vaccinated. And that's a hard problem for the administration to overcome.
Now, even though these vaccine mandates aren't necessarily being enforced from a federal level, some companies are still choosing to require their employees to get vaccinated. Why is that?
Well, there's a big difference between a federal agency doing this without legal authority and an employer putting this requirement on employees. Now, there are limitations to that. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, for example, requires that if people have legitimate medical concerns or disabilities or religious objections, that employers have to find a way to accommodate that. For example, by having the worker work remotely, or by substituting, for example, a mask mandate in the workplace before a vaccine. But for an employer to do it, absent contrary state law, is probably something they can do, so long as they respect the right of people to voice religious or medical objections.
Now, looking at the state level, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has prohibited vaccine mandates in his state. Should other states consider this measure to protect employees?
You know, honestly, Hannah, this is something I just wish the government would stay out of. I believe the vaccines are good things. I'm vaccinated myself. I believe others should be vaccinated, or at the very least talk to their doctors about it and listen to them rather than their Twitter feeds as to whether this is a good idea for them. But whenever the government gets involved in it with, a heavy hand on one side or the other, I think it just contributes to division, and it contributes to the kinds of emotional reactions to something that is really an important medical decision that people need to be making. And I wish they would be made in a non-political setting, to the extent that that's even possible in our society.
Yeah, yet another example of the government getting involved in something and making a mess of it. It's certainly sad. So, Doug, I have to ask, now that we've talked about these vaccine mandates and kind of the right direction for vaccines in our country, why did the Heritage Foundation get involved in terms of filing a lawsuit over these?
Well, I can't talk about the particulars of our lawsuit because it's a matter of ongoing litigation, but generally speaking, these are burdens that the Biden administration is unlawfully placing on employers. They're forcing employers to do record keeping, to collect vaccination information from each of their employees, to require people who don't have that documentation but claim to be vaccinated to sign an attestation that could expose them to criminal prosecution if they falsely attest to having a vaccine. That's not something employers are trying to do. Right now, they're struggling to find workers. We have record numbers of open jobs, record numbers of people quitting. 3 million people dropped out of the workforce entirely since the pandemic began. we need the economy to move forward. We need businesses to be able to do what they do well and not get themselves involved in enforcing a government policy that many find objectionable.
Mm-hmm. So, Doug, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that the Heritage Foundation isn't necessarily at the forefront of filing lawsuits against the federal government. So if that is the case, then why this issue? Why is this issue so important?
Well, this is one that I think affects such a broad spectrum of employers. When you look at the lawsuit that's been brought against the OSHA mandate on vaccines, it's a list of employers a mile long. They're in different industries. They do different things. They may be competitors against one another. But all of them find that this is an issue that's going to cause morale problems in the workplace. It's going to lead them to losing very good employees at a time when it's very difficult to find anyone to replace them. It's just a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. And Doug, we'll have to circle back with you at some point in the future to hear how everything's going. But for now, thank you so much for joining us today on Save the Nation.